Welcome to Tacoma Park Middle School. I'm here today with about 20 students to engage in a conversation around assessments, testing, and what it's like to be in a school that has both a magnet program and a regular program. I'm Eric Gershey, the student member of the board, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Jack Smith, our superintendent of schools. Thanks for joining me, Dr. Smith.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's go to our first question.
Hi, my name is Che, and I was just wondering, how do shorter assessments every quarter, like with the RQAs, prepare students for the longer assessments that they're going to see in high school, like the AP tests and SATs and in college?
Well, the whole issue of assessment is a very complicated one, and oftentimes we think that the way that something has been done is the way that it always should be done. I have lived and worked in Japan, in Thailand, in Washington State, and I've seen assessments done many different ways. And the fact is that a good number of colleges in this country actually use quarter systems, and those quarters are 3 sections during the year. Those are about just a little longer than a quarter in high school or in middle school. And so really the important part of an assessment is, does it assess what we've taught, and does it give an accurate picture of what the student has learned, and can we use that information to either maintain what we're doing because it's working or change what we're doing because we need to see higher levels of mastery by the students in that topic. And so it will not have a significant effect on what happens. In fact, AP is very strange because it's a test of a year-long course. And the fact is, in law school, you don't take tests of a year-long course. When I got my PhD, I didn't take a test of a year-long course. And so there are lots of different ways to look at it, and I would encourage our students not to be stressed about that, rather just focus on learning everything you can learn, because it's good for the assessment. It's even better for life to know the information and the skills and knowledge that you need as you walk out the door of Montgomery County Public Schools.
Yeah, and I would add, when you take AP tests in high school, it's not as much being prepared to sit down for that 3-hour period of time, but like Dr. Smith said, it's really about, you know the content, are you ready to go with all the knowledge and all the skills that you need to apply when you're taking that assessment. But has anyone taken an RQA so far or in any of your classes? Yeah. Interesting. And what has your experience been? Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Raquel, and I actually had a question about related to RQAs. And so most of my peers and I have noticed that in the world languages RQA, they haven't matched, like the practice tests haven't matched the actual RQA. So we were wondering if we would change, like, I guess the curriculum to match the RQA better, or vice versa.
So do you think that the practice test hasn't been matching what's on it, or do you feel like what you've been learning in class hasn't aligned with what's been on the assessment, or maybe both?
A little bit of both. Mostly the practice test, though. The practice test wasn't related whatsoever to the RQA.
So that's what you were really studying,
yeah.
And then you feel like you kind of got hit with a curveball.
Yeah, and most of us really like the practice test to help us out, so then we can study, and it didn't, so we were all freaking out.
Certainly something we need to take note of. And we will take note of it today from this meeting and take it back to the curriculum office and make sure that they're aware of that feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And the language RQAs are 2 days, right?
Yes.
Okay, and you were dealing with some different things, right? So
yeah.
You had to write a little bit, to
yeah,
read a little,
to oral.
speak.
Yeah.
And was that unfamiliar?
The orals seemed to be okay. I liked kind of the way that we did the orals, but for our practice test, we had to write a lot of different things and read things that most of us couldn't understand. And so when it came to the actual RQA, it was a lot simpler and easier, but we were confused as to why the practice test didn't match it.
Can I add something about
Yeah, please do.
So my name is Annika, and I not only took the World Languages RQA, I also took an RQA in my Algebra 2 class. And so I'm in a magnet math class, and I find that when I took the RQA for Algebra 2, it didn't really match what we had done in class, and it only really covered what we had done within the first 2 weeks of the quarter. And it was kind of difficult to go back and remember every individual step, because the RQA requires that you write down each and every step instead of, skipping around here, using some shortcuts. And whenever we did use those shortcuts, we got points taken off because we didn't show all of our work. Is there any way that we can kind of make those a little bit more flexible, maybe match them to the different courses? Because like from a regular Algebra 2 course to an honors course to a magnet course, there are a lot of different variables that come into play with what you know and how you answer a question.
That's an interesting problem that you identify, and it's one we're struggling with in mathematics instruction in our whole nation. And in fact, I'll just tell you, as math students, right now sitting in this middle school, as all of our middle school students are math students across 39 middle schools, you're going through a time of real transition in mathematics instruction. And that is that the whole goal of the changes that have been made in math is to make sure that students not only understand the procedure or the steps or those shortcuts that we all learn as we learn both to do math in class and to do math in the grocery store or in the, at the video arcade, whatever it is where we use that math in our heads all the time, but also to learn the conceptual understanding of it and the application of it and how it works, because for too many years in our country, math has been seen as a set of procedures. So once you learn the procedures and you learn those shortcuts, you kind of go through, but we end up as a country having a lot of students who don't understand math very well. And I won't put you on the spot, but I've heard teachers, principals, politicians say, well, I'm not very good at math. No one in our country should say, I'm not very good at math. And the way to change that is to change the instruction that we give you. So it's both procedural, including the shortcuts and the use of those, but also having really good conceptual understanding of why 9 times 9 does equal 81 every time you do it, and how you apply that in your life in lots of different situations. So you are definitely spot on in your description of what's happening, and I will take that feedback also back to the curriculum department, because we have to work our way through this transition in mathematics learning and instruction.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Elise, and so as part of Difference Makers, an after-school club that we do to help out the community, we've offered teacher help, and multiple teachers have asked us for help setting up the technology needed to do the orals for the RQAs, and I've actually had to redo orals because the technology wasn't working. So I was wondering if there are any plans to make sure that the teachers and students both know how to use this technology correctly.
It's a big problem. It's just like my math answer just now. We're going through a time of tremendous change. And so while you may not remember the world without cell phones, I remember the world without cell phones very clearly. In fact, when I was your age, in my home in Washington State, where I'm from, if I picked up the phone and I could hear one, and it was only a landline connected to the wall with a wire, and it had a dial on it, if I picked up that phone and I could hear someone speaking on it, I had to hang it up, because what was available where I lived was called a party line. And that might mean 5 houses on that line all use the same phone line. And so we have people in our schools and our community who remember every level of technology evolution and advancement. And so we're not going through this problem just in schools, but we're going through this problem everywhere in our society and moving toward more technology in medicine, more technology in finance. I mean, I never go in a bank anymore. I went in banks for decades to have to make a deposit, withdraw money, sign cards. I do it all online now, and I'm 59. So it's a really legitimate concern that you have, and one we have to keep working on and get right. But it's not unique to middle school, to Tacoma Park Middle School, to schools, or to education. It's everywhere we're looking is that shift in technology is causing us some real disruption and some real growing pains as a society.
But I'm curious, I know that we now take, some of the RQAs are going to transition to be on the computer. You take the PARC. Many of you have taken PARC assessment. Have all of you taken the PARC? Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you haven't, but you'll take it, and that's on the computer, on the Chromebooks. I'm curious, do you find that it's easier to show and display your knowledge when you're using a piece of technology, or do you prefer the traditional paper pencil model? Because I've heard a lot of concern that students want choices and flexibility. Yeah.
My name is Marat, and personally, I found it easier to work when it was with paper because like it was easier. You can just like write something and erase it, and you know you can make drafts and everything. But when it came to the computers, it was kind of like you type something and you can't make drafts and you can't do this and you can't do that. So it was just a lot harder to navigate through the test. And the themes of the test, like the actual computer, like it was the same kind of like theme every time. So like you do get kind of bored of it, and there were some kids that did fall asleep. And so when it's like a really long test and it's the same thing, just different questions constantly, like it tends to like bore most students, and we tend to fall asleep, or I don't, but like, you know. And so it's easier when it worked with paper because it was just more easier to like write with and just like erase your answers and everything else, but yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Do you work more with paper right now in your classroom's daily activities and instruction, or do you work more with technology?
Kind of half-half. Like when it came to essays and like papers we have to turn in, we do type them in and we give it to the teachers. But like the teachers give us the option to write it on paper, or like we normally just write draft on paper and then type the final one and turn it into the teachers.
Okay. Do you do any shared work on computers? Where people work on a variety of different parts of a project and then all put it together? Okay.
Yeah.
So I noticed that on the park with the math assessments, it's really hard to show your work because you have to have like the lines and all the symbols made it kind of hard instead of like you only have the division symbol. And now we've learned that the division symbol is also like the fraction. So it's kind of hard to show your work, and it takes a lot of time, so like you barely finish and have time to go over everything. Mm-hmm. It just takes a lot of time.
There's been a lot of struggles with the equation editor on all of the online tests, and the goal is to improve those over time, and they will improve over time. For example, more than 10 years ago, I was a curriculum director in a school system here in Maryland, and the equation editor would take hours and hours to create paper tests. So if you were typing the test in a computer, and those have all improved, but now we have end user application equation editors, and we simply have to make them better. And we can, as a society, certainly do that. It's just this very slow, painful process of moving from a paper-based world to a computer-based world. But you're absolutely right. Your observation is 100% correct. The equation editor has not worked very well on the PARCC test.
Yeah.
My name is Zev, and I had a different question about PARCC, which was I've found a lot of the time some of the questions are confusing and a bit harder to answer on the Chromebooks, and if there was a way to opt out of it or make the questions be a bit less confusing or like reduce the time.
Do you think that the questions are confusing because they are on the Chromebooks, or because just the nature of the way that the questions are written?
There's a bit of both. I've heard some stories about very strange questions. And sometimes with math questions, it can just be hard to write out the answer.
So one of the shifts that we've seen is that, especially for you 8th graders, you probably remember taking the MSA, right? Remember that? Much different test, right? Paper and pencil, and it was very single dimensional. I mean, you were trying to show that you could do a very discrete piece of work and information, and that's what it did. Unfortunately, by testing or assessing that discrete piece of information, can you add these two fractions? What the test didn't do was to see if you could learn that procedure and just add them, then you were right. And people assumed that you knew what a fraction was, how it worked when you put it in a different situation. And that goes back to that conceptual understanding and that application I was talking about. I was in Shanghai, China last December. I was the state superintendent last year and the chief academic officer before that for the Maryland State Department of Education. Guys, they're doing some really complicated things on computers in math. And the same is true in India, the same is true in Japan, where I lived for most of the 90s. And it's a different world in education for us now. And you will ultimately be the beneficiaries. You will receive benefit from that. but it does make for a lot of these shifts that you're describing, and I love that you can describe them so clearly, because I've been talking about these for the last 5 years with the people who designed Park, with the people who are designing the curricular programs, with the people who are looking at how to build better assessments. And your description is as good as anything I've heard about how these things are shifting and changing. So it's going to continue to be a challenge for the next few years until, just like cell phones were. You weren't born yet. First cell phone I ever saw, early 90s, Seattle, Washington, was this big. I am not making that up, was this big. And it could do one thing. It could call a number and have a conversation. So, and now look where we are.
Hi, I'm Isaac.
Hi, Isaac.
So in the English Park, I feel like some of the questions aren't completely clear. And for example, some questions are like, how does this passage make you feel? Which is a little difficult to answer sometimes. So I was wondering how much say do you have, and how much say does Montgomery County have in changing like the questions and the way Park works?
Well, when I worked at the State Department, we had quite a bit of say in Maryland as a state that was using the Park assessment. So the state of Maryland still has quite a bit of say in it. And one of the things that the state board has said in Maryland is that Park needs to continue to improve, just like Smarter Balance and the other online tests do, because the state of Maryland is going to choose the test over time that improves the most and does the best. I actually was on the 10th grade language arts performance level setting group 2 years ago who looked at the Park 10th grade test. So I took it like 7 times in 1 week with about 40 people in the basement of a hotel. And you're exactly right. Once again, you guys are right in your observations and so insightful, because I think sometimes when you get a group of English teachers together, they kind of go overboard. And I'm an English teacher. You know, they kind of say, well, we have to find out how students feel, and we have to do this, and we have to do that. Well, the bottom line is we have to know if you understand what you read, if you can use it in a reasonable, thoughtful way, if you can write about it, and if you can speak about it. And beyond that, your brain is so much more powerful than that test. That's really what we have to be assessing. And so I think over time we'll continue to see shifts, whether we use the Park test or some other assessment, that improve it and make all of this online testing better and more useful and more regular, more just a part of the experience of school instead of this big event.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, it was a great question about how much say does Montgomery County have, and I think that the question is sort of minimal because the state mandates sort of that all students at a certain level in Montgomery County take the Park test, and then the state, my understanding is that the state then sends us down and we're forced to administer that test. But we have to work with the state if we want changes, and we, as the school board or as the school administration, can't directly affect what the test looks like unless my interpretation is incorrect.
The federal law actually is what drives the requirement of a state test, and Maryland just happens to use the Park. Some other states write their own, some use Smarter Balance. And so, but we have a lot of influence in the way we as a large school system, the largest in the state, talk with the state about the improvements that are needed. And these are improvements that we've been talking about, as I said, for now 3 or 4 years since it was first administered, 2.5 years ago and before that. So we're not going to stop pushing for improvement.
Yeah.
Just one thing I would like to add about the RQAs is that right now some teachers have had to teach to the test. Like I'm in a Spanish 2 class, and my teacher had to teach to the text because it was from a website that is in Spain for people who speak fluent Spanish. People in my class did not understand nearly anything in the text, and so for like 3 or 4 classes, all we were doing was going over the text and making sure everyone could understand it for the test. And so, but that wasn't happening when we had the semester exams because those covered almost exactly what we were covering in class. With the RQAs, it was way off what the level of how well we could speak Spanish.
Thank you for that observation. I'm actually going to ask the people who work in the curriculum division from Montgomery County Public Schools to watch this show I am. I want them to hear your feedback because I think it's incredibly important that we understand how students experience what they're doing, and as well as ask all of our teachers and educators to watch the show. We need to listen to what students tell us because they tell us how things work for them. And if you didn't exist, and this school didn't exist, and the 204 schools of Montgomery County didn't exist, we wouldn't have jobs. Now, that doesn't leave you off the hook, so don't get too excited, because you have a big job as a student, but we can talk about that at a different point. But we need to listen to what students are learning, and if they are learning enough, and if they're not, what are we going to do about it?
Did you have an observation in the back?
My name is Felix, and I was wondering why is there a ungraded or a completion part of the RQA assessment?
I don't know the answer to that, but we will find that answer and send it back to you guys, okay? Why is there an ungraded
What does it
part of
look
the
like?
RQA?
There was like a written part, an oral part, and like a test thing. And the written part was not graded, but it's like supposed to be graded next quarter or something like that. And it like switches which part is graded, but we still have to take it anyways.
And it identifies on the assessment that it's not graded?
Oh, that's what my teacher told me.
Oh, okay. Because the two reasons why you put ungraded things on an assessment, typically, one is to test items, to see if they work for students, if they make sense, if they're reasonable, and the other reason you put ungraded parts is to give students experience with a different way of assessing prior to holding them responsible for that assessment and having consequence in your grade for that assessment. So that'd be the two reasons why there would be an ungraded part, either to test the test or to give students exposure and experience before it's part of their regular experience where there is a response with a grade. So,
Did someone else have an observation or a question? Yeah.
So I was wondering if there was possible for MCPS to create study guides for the RQAs.
We can certainly ask a question.
Yeah, I think that study guides, or the point of RQAs, like as we were discussing earlier, is sort of to integrate that assessment into the daily or into your school life. And I think that if we were creating the RQAs successfully and we were accomplishing our goal, then there wouldn't need to be a study guide because the RQA would look like what you're learning on a day-to-day basis. Now, understanding that within the length of 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a quarter, we forget things, we need to go back, we need to review. It helps us to have a piece of paper which synthesizes some of the topics and pulls together, ideas that we've learned up until that point. So it is a good point, but I think that study guides as a whole can tend to, as we were talking about earlier, the language class did have a study guide, and it can tend to focus us and we tend to only study that study guide when we really need to be looking at the full scheme and the full picture of things. And we also, I think, need to remember with study guides in general that that's not going to be a replica of the test, that's not just the same test with different numbers or different letters, but that it's a tool by which to look at all of the things that we've learned.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and the reason that we kind of are asking for a study guide is because, like they said, the curriculum and the test don't actually match up. Like in Spanish, the RQAs came up on the arts, and in Spanish we weren't learning about the arts. We were learning about camping and other stuff. So when this kind of thing just comes up out of nowhere, it's better to kind of have a little knowledge on what's going to be on there, or just some kind of background information. So you'll be ready for it.
I think another thing that comes into play with the curriculum and the RQA is not quite matching up is the timing of it. We're doing the art unit in Spanish now as opposed to at the middle of quarter one. It may be because our teacher went on maternity leave halfway through quarter one, but I don't feel that it was fair to us as students in the class to have to take an exam or an RQA on something that we weren't really prepared for because we were doing the camping unit at the time. So.
Thanks.
I think you've hit, though, on a really important topic about schooling in general, and that is that there are an infinite number of variables that take place across hundreds of different classrooms across the system. And the fact that your reference to your teacher and not being available to you is one of those things that makes the process of schooling more complicated and more difficult. And while that's not desirable, we'd never want it and never choose that, you or me or your principal. One of the things you're going to find is in life that those variables happen everywhere. They happen everywhere in your life. And right now, that experience is very important to you, and that grade is important, and that performance and your sense of self about how you do on things. And it's certainly important to me about how I do on things. And at the same time, part of what we need you to know and be able to do when you leave school is constantly being able to adjust to that. Because what you bring to school as your unique individual is more important than the school experience you have. It's a transactional experience. So let me give you an example. You go in Safeway or Giant or whatever grocery store, Whole Foods, whatever grocery store you go to. So you get something, you hand them money, they let you walk out the door with the thing. That's a transaction. You all got that, you all know that. You've known that for years. School's the same thing. What you bring to the school and what the school provides you is a transaction, and how that works. And that transaction isn't always smooth, it isn't always perfect, and neither is life. So that's just a little short lesson there, sorry. Don't mean to,
Did either of you back there have something to say? Because I know we've heard next to Felix, because I just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity.
Well, I agree with everything that people have been saying so far, that the curriculum and the RQA are kind of mismatched. They're not really matching. And yeah, I think everything that's been said so far kind of covers what I've been thinking.
And we don't only need to talk about the RQA. There's tons of assessments, tons of things that we experience in our daily school lives. And if you wanted to touch on either of those perfectly, great too.
Yeah, well, I think that the tests are kind of, the levels may be a little bit mismatched. Like some people are at different levels than other people. And maybe the map R it goes to a kind of higher level than some people may be at. So when we're taking the map R, it might go to something totally random that we don't really know. And so it's kind of a lot of guessing on the map R and map M too. So
well, you're exactly right. They are constructed that way to show a range of student understanding, because all of us understand within a range at different levels. It depends on the topic, the part of the topic. Like, for example, in English, you might be really good at grammar, but you're not so firm or solid in your understanding of sentence construction. And so it's going to show you, in sentence construction, maybe below the grade level standard, but it's going to show you in grammar well above it. And so that's why they're constructed that way, because first and foremost, an assessment should do a couple of things. It should tell me how I'm doing and where I need to work. And it should tell my teacher and the educators that work with me what my area of strength is, what my area where I need to keep working is. And that's why they're constructed that way. But your observation is exactly right.
I'm Atan, and I realized that in the map R, the level went really high for some reason. And I'm an ESOL, so it wasn't supposed to go that high. And what can we do to change that it would stay on your grade level rather than going up to 12th grade?
Are you an ESOL student?
Yeah.
So have you taken the WIDA assessment?
No, not yet.
The WIDA assessment is designed to look more at where you are, and the MAP-R is more designed to look at the range of where students are at this age, at this time. And they both do different things. Remember that any assessment is part of an instructional cycle that we teach, we check, we reteach, we teach more, we check again, we teach, we learn, we check, we learn, we reteach. And by research, very, very good research, the single best assessment ever for your learning is your own self-assessment. So for example, I said there are 204 schools in the school system. Right away when I came here in the summer to work in this job, the system made me a set of 204 flashcards. And it has the one for Tacoma Park, has the name of the school, the address, the principal's name, and I study those flashcards all the time. I assess myself. Now, if I were to take a test right now on the 204, I'm guessing I would get somewhere between a 50 and a 60%. I'm much better at the middle school and the high school because there are fewer of them, 25 high schools, 39 middle schools. There are 133 elementary schools. And a lot of them use the same words in different arrangements in their names, like view and rock and creek and those sorts of things. So the best thing we can do as a learner, any of us, I'm still learning, I will be learning the rest of my life, is to assess myself all the time. There is no better assessment than self-assessment.
Do you memorize the addresses as well?
No. I used that cell phone that I resisted for so long to find the schools.
So I'm curious, any last thoughts on assessments or testing? Yeah.
On map assessments, is that okay if I continue?
Go,
okay.
sure.
So a lot of the time, like in the beginning, it's fine, but then after like the first like 4 questions or so, you can't really read the like passage. It kind of gets to a level where it's kind of difficult to like decipher the language that they uses. So it's like you feel like you're guessing for most of the time as you go throughout. Even if you like end up with like a good score, you feel like, why did I get a good score if I didn't understand anything that was on the test?
I remember the same feeling
So-
when I was in middle school.
So the test is like a sixth grade plus. So it's like going from 6th grade up to like who knows where. So I think it would be interesting if we could have like a separate like map tests where it wouldn't go as high of a range that we were guessing so much on them.
That's looking for, as I said earlier, a different kind of information, but what you're describing is what's called a Lexile score. And I think it'd be really useful if all of you had your Lexile scores. And that means at what is your independent mastery level, proximal level of reading. And your proximal level of reading isn't down here, because that's too easy. And it isn't at the ceiling, because that's way too high, and that's what you're describing. It's right here, just where you understand most of what you're reading, and you can fill in the gaps, because that's really what critical thinking is. That's the definition of critical thinking, the ability to take information and then based on your prior knowledge, your ability to ask questions, your ability to think through a problem and kind of untie the knot, is to figure it out. And so you're right, we should offer every student their Lexile score, and that's your proximal level of reading that's right at the top of what you're reading effectively and can do independently and with mastery outside of the classroom and the teacher and all those things. So that's a very good point, and something we should do.
And a lot of the observations certainly, I think, show that MAP does a really good job of telling your teacher what you know, but it doesn't really help you understand what you know after you help to take that assessment. And it wasn't necessarily designed to do that, but it's something we need to continue to think about. So last thought on assessment or thought on being in a school?
The map assessment.
Okay.
It's really quick.
Okay.
I just wanted to offer the opposite point of view from what everyone has been saying. I'm one of the people who actually feels like MAP assessments are that self-assessment that you were talking about. I personally feel like I understand what the scores mean. Most people don't. I went through this thing in 4th grade where our teachers talked to us about what every score meant. A lot of people don't have that. Like, we get our Lexile scores at the end, but it's rare to know what the scores actually mean. So if there was like some resource that we could all go to tell us what every score means, that would be really useful.
Good point. We will definitely carry that back. I love that suggestion.
Great. Well, that's all the time that we have for this student conversation. It's been a great, robust, comprehensive discussion, and I thank all the students at Tacoma Park Middle School, Dr. Smith, Ms. Deeney for hosting us today. So thanks again for joining us.